All right, so we're recording now. Welcome once again. This is our fourth installment of The Craft of Code. Today we're going to be hooking up the DevTools from Chrome to our Node JavaScript. So you've probably been working mostly in browser code, and you've been using the DevTools to pause, debug, look at variables. But now that you're turning towards server-side code, it's not as obvious. How can I use the debugger to figure out what's going on with my code? And it's a little bit hidden and kind of tricky, and a lot of students miss. There's like only a tiny part in the learn that says like, go here if you want to learn how to connect the DevTools. But I think it's really easy to kind of skip by that and say, I'll worry about that later. So what I want to do is just give you a brief introduction to how to do this so that you know that it exists, that you know where it is. And if you go to this repo in the README, there are links to instructions for how to do this later. So I've got the repo downloaded on my computer already. I've got the README here next to me. And what we're going to start with is we're going to start with this file here, contrived math. So I've made a couple of functions here that are kind of contrived. So we've got an add function, takes number 1 and 2, and it's going to add them together. We've also got an adds done variable here to just keep track of how many times we've added, mostly just to show you some stuff in the DevTools later. We've got a multiply function, which uses a while loop to add numbers together and give you the result. And then I've got a raise to, so like an exponential function, which is recursive and uses the multiply function that we've written. So let's start out by running our tests. We've got some tests down here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to tell Node that I would like it to run this file. So I can say Node contrived. And again, I'm going to use my tab autocomplete because I don't want to finish typing out that whole thing. Now I'm going to press enter. Oh, look at that. 2 of our tests failed. Okay, so now I got to try and figure out what went wrong. Maybe with Node code or in your toy problems, you're turning to doing some console logs. But instead of that, we're going to hook the DevTools up to this small JavaScript file that we're running in Node. So coming over here to the README, we've got this line of code right here. So what this is doing is it's going to use Node. Here, we're passing it this special flag called inspect-brk for break. And then we're telling it what file to run. What --inspect-break does is it's going to run Node and it's going to open it up to the debugger and it's going to break on the first line. So it's going to automatically pause. So we're going to hit enter. Great. Can everybody read this okay? Great. So you can see here it says debugger listening on. So we're going to take this address, we're going to copy that, and we're going to come over to our web browser. Also note that it does say for help see this website. You can follow that to get help on how to do this. So we're going to open a new tab. We're going to paste in that URL. We're going to hit enter. And we're going to get something that looks like we've broken everything. Fear not. Open up your console. And notice here, there's a green jewel that looks like the Node logo. You press that, and it's going to open up the debugger for you. Okay, we'll wait for this to load. So here we are, and we're now paused on the first line of execution. Sometimes Node doesn't pop up the right file in here. What you can do though is do Command P. And you can open up any file. So we'll just look for contrived math. So there it is. I'll hit enter. And there we are. We're now in contrived math. We're sitting on line 3 of execution. Let me see if I can make this a little bit bigger for you. Okay. So let's take a moment here and look at all the tools that the debugger gives us to move through our code and pause at different points. So these arrows up here all have a slightly different behavior, very different behavior, I guess. So I'm gonna go over them a little bit here, and then I'll try and kind of call out which ones I'm using as we move forward. So this one over here, step is the smallest way to advance the code. This is gonna go down one step in the execution. Then over here, we've got step over next function. This basically is going to not go into a function if, for example, we'll talk about it when we get there. Then this one is going to take you to the next function that's getting called and take you inside of it. Then step out of the current function, and we'll talk about this a little bit later as we actually go into the code. We'll pop you basically one function out on the call stack. Then you've got the blue arrow. This is going to take you to your next breakpoint. So breakpoints are either points where you've written debugger in the code, or when you press on a number over here, you can add a breakpoint. So pressing this, well, that's probably going to take us a very long way. So let's just go over here. This will take you right down to your next breakpoint. So this can be a really handy way to navigate, so you don't have to be going step by step by step through the entire file. Then something that's hidden and kind of important to know about is if you hold down on the blue arrow, you'll get a play button and a stop button. Play button will run the execution of the code all the way through to the end without stopping anymore. And the stop button is going to stop execution. That can be handy if you are debugging and you realize, oh no, I'm about to send the code into an infinite loop. Instead of having to, stop the whole process and close down your tab or reattach the debugger, you can just stop it right from here. Okay, great. So we've talked about that. Now we've also got over here a couple of really handy panels. We've got our scope panel over here. This is telling us all about the variables that we have access to currently. So you can see there's a local scope right now. There's a global scope. We'll look at those a little bit more as we go through the code. You've also got your call stack. This tells you all of the function calls that are happening. You can move through this as well. We'll look at that in a minute. Your breakpoints over here, you can kind of turn them off without deleting them, which can be kind of handy. And you've got your watch panel. This can be really handy if you've got something that you know that you're trying to look at. So for example, maybe we really want to be watching what's happening with ads done, and it'll tell us that. But you can also put other expressions in here. So maybe we really only want to know if ads is equal to 0. So we can do ads done triple equals 0. This will tell me right now it's true. So sometimes that can be a really handy way to see if the behavior you're expecting is happening. And the watch will keep updating as those variables update as you move through the code. Okay, so we know now that multiply was failing. So let's go through over here. We're going to go to the test. We're going to stop our code right inside the first line of multiply. So now I'm going to hit F8, which is a shortcut for the blue arrow. So we're going to resume script to the next breakpoint. Here we are. So let's take a look. We're in the call stack. This is our first call of multiply. We know number 1 is 2, number 2 is 5, result is 0. So now we're going to advance using this small step. Now we've got a loop. We expect that to happen. We're going to advance again. Now this line gets a little bit interesting because we're calling a function here. So if I press F9 here, I'm eventually going to go into the add function. If I were to press F10 here, it will jump over this function and take me right to this line. So let's do that once really quick. So we press this, notice that result happened, the numbers got added, but we didn't go into add. So let's keep going. We're going to step forward again, step forward again. This time we're going to take the small step, F9, into the add function. Notice this time our execution went to the first line of the add function. And here we can verify that add is doing what we expect, 2 plus 2. So I think number 1, the result should be 4. So I'm going to go forward. Once you're on the return line, if you press it one more time, before it closes out this function call, you are going to get a little special notice here that says what the return value is of your function. This is really handy to know. Also notice our multiply call is still on the call stack. We can go into that multiply call and we can see what the variables are in this execution context. This could be really handy for like recursion problems. And we might look at that in a little bit. Right, so here we are, we're returning 4, great. We hit F9 again. We've now finished the add thing. We're doing num2 minus equals 1, great. And if we were really trying to debug, we'd be paying a lot more attention to exactly what's going on. I happen to know what the bug is, which is over here in result. So at this point, we can say, great, thank you very much, debugger. We were able to gain all of that great information. We're going to resume execution till the end. We're going to go fix our little bug, which is that here, we shouldn't be adding to result. We should be setting result equal. Reset that. Now, notice down here, the code says waiting for debugger to disconnect. You need to close this for this. You need to close the debugger for this terminal process to finish completely. But it can be really handy to not do that, because what we can do now is I'm going to just Control-C and force this to stop. Then I'm going to run the same command, and it should pop up in the debugger again. So you can see debugger popped up automatically for me. We didn't have to go through that process of opening up the web browser, finding the jewel, et cetera, et cetera. Let's really quickly go into a recursive call, just to do a little bit of looking at the scope. So I'm going to break at the first call of raise to recursive. You can see that this calls itself over and over again. We're going to advance to that breakpoint. Here we are. So I know that the way that this works is 4 is going to get subtracted by 1 every time. So I'm just going to hit F8 again, which is the blue arrow. To go down, okay, we see exponent is 3, exponent is 2, exponent is 1. Cool. I can now look on my call stack at what the values are of everything in these various contexts, which can be really handy. So in this particular function, also don't concentrate too much on exactly what the functions are doing. In this case, this is more just about taking a tour through the debugger. Okay, so here I'm going to go one more time to the next breakpoint, which is 0. And I'm like, okay, great. So I've reached my base case solution. I want to see what's going to happen. Okay, our if statement triggered. Excellent. So we're going to return 1. Okay, now I know that this function is going to return 1. I can go back to the previous function and kind of test my hypothesis and say, okay, so multiply is going to take the base, which is 2, and it's going to multiply it times 1, because I know that the result of this call is going to be 1 now. And so I can kind of use that to test my hypothesis and see if this is working the way that I expected. So we'll do another small step in here. We've popped off one call. Now, interestingly enough, the next thing we now have to do is run multiply. So we're going to step forward into multiply. Now, here I say, oh, right, multiply is fine. I already debugged that. Let's step out of this current function. I don't care about what happens in here. I already know it's fine. Let's step out. We've now stepped out. We're back to that same raise to recursive that we did before. And I say, okay, I know multiply works. Let's just keep going to the end of this. So now we're going to use the step over next function call, meaning that we're not going to go inside the multiply function. Instead, we're just going to go to the end of this, which is going to pop off another call to raise to recursive. We can do that again. Oh, and it's going to show us our return value before it's done doing that, actually. Very handy. And we just continue. Okay, So there's kind of a little bit of a tour of DevTools, maybe a couple pointers that you might not have picked up in your work with it. There's, if you want to in your free time, there's another kind of example for you to look through, which is class example. This is kind of a cool place because it shows you some class instantiation as well as some inheritance, and you can kind of maybe stop through here and see what's happening to each of the variables as you go. Oh, you know, something that I forgot to look at really quick. I want to show you that you can look at your closure scope with the debugger. So let's run contrived math again. I remember how we had that add variable or adds done variable. We can actually go ahead and we'll advance to raise to recursive, right? So in here, you've got your local scope, which is everything that's like right in this function, right? You've got your base, your exponent, this, which is undefined at the moment. But notice that we also have closure. Here's where we have access to the add function, the multiply function, raise to recursive function, as well as the adds done. So this can be really handy to understand what variables are in scope as you execute your code. Okay, now you said, Colin, that this is going to be really handy for like debugging your server code. These are all toy problem things. I don't care about toy problems. Let's hook this up to a server that we're running. We're gonna, actually, let's close that window just to see what that looks like. So we'll close this, debugger, and there it is. It disconnected. Everything's hunky-dory. Done this. Here's a little summary in the README about some of the tools that we just touched on. So now we're going to fix the server. I've already done the installation. I'm going to close these windows. We're going to open up the server.js. Okay. Now, following the instructions here, we're going to use nodemon -- inspect server. So before we used inspect - break, which is really great because it pauses your code right away. So you don't have to like necessarily put a debugger statement in. You can use the DevTools to do all the breakpoints. But sometimes maybe like with a server, you actually want your server running in the background and you only want it to stop when you've told it to stop. And it can be really annoying to do inspect - break every time you like change something in your code to have your, you'd have to go back to the debugger and be like, okay, fine, finish setting up the server. So that's why here we're going to use nodemon because we're going to be changing the files. And we're going to use -- inspect so that the code doesn't automatically stop. It's only going to stop where we want it to stop. So I'm going to press that. Excellent. Once again, you'll see this familiar little web thing. You can paste that in here. And actually the Joule was already present, so we could just do that. So now we've got our DevTools connected up to our server. Let's do a little split screen situation. Okay, and just to show that our server's running, we'll open that up. Cool, here's our little server. This is a really simple app. You're gonna put a GitHub handle in here and it'll give you back some basic stats on it. If you give no handle, then it's gonna return your stats. So I'm gonna give it no handle, I'm gonna say get stats. There we go, a page. Oh, some fix me's. Got to fix some stuff. So let's look over here at the code. We're looking at this code right here. So this is what is taken care of when there's no user. So we've got an if statement up here that says, if there's a username, then we're going to do something. If there's no username, we're going to do something else. So that's over here. Something really tricky when you start interacting with libraries and requests is that these built-in objects from these libraries can be really complicated and you don't always know what you're dealing with. A really great thing that you can do is pause the code where you have access to these objects and look at them in the DevTools. it's a lot easier to do than console logs because the DevTools give you a really great interface for working with like nested objects. You can also use the console to run like various commands on it, and like just, you know, anything you can basically do in JavaScript, you can kind of do to these objects with some limits. But it's a really great way to get a handle of like what you're looking at. Actually, I guess I could make this a little bit bigger for everybody too. Oh, look at my poor CSS. It's not wrapping. All right, so I've got this to do here. It says we need to fill these in. This is all information that's coming from the GitHub API. So it's all going to be inside the GitHub response object. So let's add a debugger statement here. Okay, now I'm going to save. NodeMon is going to restart the server for me. You can see our debugger is listening. We can go back to our debugger over here. Now we need to actually trigger this. So we're going to send a request with no username, and that is going to trigger the debugger. And you'll see we've now paused in the code exactly where we are. So I need to find the username, public, and private repos. So since I'm paused here, I've got access to GitHub response object. So in my console, which you can close by pressing escape or open by pressing escape, you can do GitHub res, hit enter. You now have this object that you can look at your leisure right here in the console. So I'm going to say, okay, data. That's probably where the data is. So let's look in data. I'll take a look through here, and I'm just trying to find somewhere where it probably says like cshosh login. I say, oh, great. So it's the login property. Now I've got this paused right here in front of me. I'm going to fix my code. So I know that this needs to be GitHub res .data .login. And I can even test that down here by saying, am I writing the right thing? GitHub res .data .login. Press enter. That gave me exactly what I wanted. Remember, my code is still paused in here. Now I need to get the public repos. So let's look for that in here. Total private repos, I need that. So let's grab that. So I know that that's going to be very similar, but instead of .login, I'm going to want to do GitHub .total private repos, and then public. It's going to be very similar. Let's see, public repos right there. Data.public repos. Okay, great. So I'm done with this. Thank you very much, debugger. We're going to advance you all the way to the end. Just say, keep going. Excellent. We're going to save our code here. And now, actually, we're going to get rid of this debugger statement so it doesn't pause, save. Let's go see if we fixed our problem. Hit again. Okay, let's see. Look at that. cshosh, public repos 17, private repos 34. So I hope you can see the power of being able to pause your code as you're running it, be able to inspect those items, be able to manipulate them and test out your code, and make those corrections in time without having to dig through console logs, figure out, oh, did that get logged correctly? Did that not get logged correctly? As well as I hope you can see the power of kind of getting familiar with the tools, how you move through the code. All of this stuff will hopefully help you debug your code a lot faster. I've got a couple minutes here for some questions if anybody wanted to ask anything. I wish I knew this during junior phase. Yes, Tim, that is why we're doing this. Okay, really quick, I'm going to show you one more thing that I think a lot of people don't know about, which is back in contrived math. So if we run this guy again, spec break contrived math. Debugger's going to stop. Okay, there's a second type of breakpoint, which is called a conditional breakpoint. This can be really handy when you're doing loops. So we're gonna, and also recursion. So we're going to advance to 11. We're gonna press the little blue arrow. Great, so now we're in here. So I know every time this loops, num2 is gonna be reduced by 1. Say I don't care about what happens in here until num2 is 1. I'm going to, instead of left clicking here, I'm going to right click and say add conditional breakpoint. Here you can write an expression. So like num2 triple equals 1. Now this yellow breakpoint, orange breakpoint, is not going to be triggered until num2 is equal to 1. So let's test that out. We're going to resume script to the next breakpoint. So we just saved ourselves a whole bunch of like advancing. Oh, interesting. Because of how this is assigned, it actually hit num1 like kind of ahead of time, or did I say num2? Anyways, I think you get the point. Conditional breakpoints can be really handy to kind of fast forward you to a point that you know you want to look at something, so you're not having to dig through that code. Cool. Any last minute requests? We've got a couple minutes here before you'll have to go. What's up, Tim?
How did you learn, or how do you practice debugger? Do you go through like any good tutorials? Are there any tutorials that you can recommend, or do you just really just force yourself to use it in as many situations as possible?
Yeah, the linked in the repo, there's some good resources. So in the README, Chrome or Google has some like little practice areas and some really good docs about their tools. So I use that. I think, yeah, up here they're linked. And then, yeah, I just use it all the time because I think it's so darn handy. And I had experience working with a program called FileMaker making databases. And when I discovered that I could use a debugger in there, I just like completely abandoned logging stuff because it was so much faster and easier for me. So I have a little bit of background knowledge of like what a debugger should or shouldn't be able to do. So anytime I was using the Chrome debugger, you just kind of are like, oh, I wonder if it can do X. But I think just being able to like pause it in a place where you're looking at an object that you're not familiar with is so powerful. Highly recommend that if you're like building tests for stuff, it can be a really good way to be, because sometimes you're using like these complicated objects and you're like, I don't know how to find the thing that I'm looking to test. You can pause the debugger, look at the object, and in the console, you can like write out your test basically and see if that test is giving you the response you want, and then you can put it into your code. I don't know if that answered your question.
Nice.
Juniors, please make sure you're not late for anything. I don't know what's next on your calendars, but feel free to leave whenever. I will stick around for a couple minutes because I've got nothing up next if more questions want to be asked. I also can't see everybody, so go ahead and just call out.
Yeah, I don't know. Like I understand that debugging is probably one of the most critical skills as a developer, and that's something that I definitely need to embrace and like improve on. Yeah, like any strategies that you can, I guess, provide in terms of like, yeah, I mean, just ways to improve. I mean, I know obviously practice, right? But
Yeah,
my mind just definitely doesn't even go towards using any debugging tools. So
yeah, I think that the trick is force yourself to use it so that when you need it, it's not a chore to have to use it, because you're never going to use it if it's a chore to use it.
yeah.
And how do you make it not a chore to use? Practice. I honestly think the repo that I just made is really good really good way to practice. And I think understanding and learning how to use the different ways that you move through stuff. Oh, is there an event in the junior room about to happen? No? Okay, great.
No, it's bare minimum requirements right now, so people are just coming in here to hang.
Gotcha. Sorry, Tim. I think if you download this repo, it's got some really good things to practice moving around. Like the contrived math is a good way to practice how to move. I think one of the most frustrating things about learning the debugger is not knowing how to get through the code or get to the code that you want to get to. And sometimes that can be really hard. And you can get lost easily by like if we were to go into console log statement and hit like F9, you are going to go into like that JavaScript like core library. And it's kind of terrifying and a little bit intimidating. So knowing that like in that situation, you can just hit like the blue arrow and you'll go to your next breakpoint, or you can hit the up arrow, the like escape from a function, and that'll take you out of that. Like getting comfortable with that kind of movement, I think has made me more inclined to use the debugger when I might not have otherwise.
Yeah, that's totally fair. Yeah, at this point, like I'm just not comfortable with it, so I refrain. But yeah. So that's good advice. I'll definitely take a look at your repo. So thanks.
Yeah. And do check out the Google's like dev help stuff. They've got great videos on using all sorts of parts of the debugger, network tab, snippets, all of that. Really good resources.
Sounds good. Thanks, Colin.
Thank you. I'm gonna stop the recording now.